Welcome to Something Rhymes with Purple. Susie, you find me in skittish mood today.
Ooh, tell me why.
Well, I tell you why. By the way, if you're new to this podcast, it's all about words and language, and it's presented by two of us. One is Susie Dent, known to her close friends as Susanna. The other is Gyles Brandreth, known to his as Sir. Anyway, we have been presenting this podcast for about 5 years, but I'm excited about today because we're in the world of nonsense, the world of words that are gobbledygook or even gibberish, the words that are, well, that are playful and ridiculous. And I love all that. Have I ever told you my story about Spike Milligan?
Possibly, but I would love you to refresh my memory because I obviously can't remember it. I know we have spoken about him before and we've spoken about his epitaph, but I'm not sure.
Oh, yes, his famous epitaph. I told you I was ill.
Yes.
Yes, it's brilliant. And I think he really did have it put on the tombstone. It's not just an idea.
So, no, tell me.
Spike Milligan, I was lucky enough to know him. He was an eccentric person, a brilliant person, extremely funny. He wrote a lot of poetry, some of which was nonsense. Often, though, within the nonsense was a lot of good sense. But he was truly eccentric. And we did together, we compiled a book called Every Man's Book of Nonsense for the Everyman Library. And it was a collection of nonsense prose and nonsense poetry. And it was to be launched at the Poetry Society in Earl's Court Square. Yeah. And I was there really as his editor. He was the star attraction. Anyway, I turned up on the relevant day. No sign of Spike Milligan. We waited anxiously in the room for, we got a big crowd because Spike Milligan was a big star. And we waited. 7 o'clock came when the party was due to begin, and I got up. There were sort of sighs and groans because it was just me. And then as I began speaking, behind me, in the corner of the room, a box began moving, sort of heaving from side to side, a huge box. And as I apologized for Spike Milligan not being there, the box burst open and out popped Spike Milligan.
You've never told us that story. I love it.
He had been hiding in this box. It was now 7 p.m. He'd been hiding in this box since 5 p.m.
No.
He had arrived before everybody else. He got into the room. He'd hidden himself in this box and he'd waited there for this moment. Is that extraordinary?
Could he sleep in it? I mean, how big was this box?
It was a very large box. You could certainly, but he must have been crouching down in it. Maybe he was sitting on something in it. I don't remember the detail, but it certainly was an amazing coup de théâtre, wasn't it?
Oh, totally. Yes. And I bet everybody loved it. It's coming out of a cake.
Yeah. So I don't know why I'm talking about him, except we're going to talk about nonsense. Though before we do actually get into our load of gibberish and gobbledygook and whatever, we must tell everybody about our special subscription podcast. Because each week, well, some people know this, some people don't. Susie and I, we go a bit wild after the show in the Purple Plus Club. And we try to go into more depth about the origins and evolution of words. And we've had some new ideas about what's going to happen in the Purple Plus Club room. But prepare yourselves. At the moment, we're nearing the end of our Wit and Wisdom series, an alphabetical run through writers and others who we think are both witty and wise. But we've got some new stuff coming along. Anyway, to become a subscriber, you get all of the normal main episodes absolutely ad-free, and on top of that, you get to be part of our Purple People Plus Club, which is rather fun.
It is rather fun.
Susie, do you know there are 113 episodes already recorded? Isn't that amazing?
Wow.
So lots and lots of content to catch up on. It's only $2.99 a month, which, is the price of a tub of ice cream or a mini magnum. The mini magnums are getting smaller and smaller. But that's not
shrinkflation. No, I'm.
Is that what it's called?
Yes. It's not a very good word, is it? Shrinkflation. I mean, it's quite a clumsy portmanteau, but I suppose everybody knows what it means.
Well, we're going to come up to some portmanteaus because, of course, one of the people we may be talking about here will be Lewis Carroll, who is considered the father of the portmanteau word. Am I right?
Yes, absolutely. He invented that very word.
And he certainly created some nonsense words. Can we begin with nonsense? If nonsense is our theme, sense is obviously an old word, nonsense simply means not sense, I assume.
Exactly, that which is not sense, so absurd words or meaningless ideas. The first record that we have in the Oxford English Dictionary is 1612.
Wow.
And it talks about others making nonsense and infuse loathing into the nice stomach of the reader. There we go. So hopefully we will not infuse loathing into the stomachs of the purple people. But there's so many words in English, and particularly in the historical dictionary, for nonsense. You know, there's balderdash, there's codswallop, there is, oh my goodness, you mentioned gibberish, there's gobbledygook.
Yeah, what is gibberish something to do with an animal? Why do I have a faint recollection
gobbledygook. Gobbledygook is to do with an animal. So gibberish was purely born for its sound, gibber, 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 gibber.
Oh.
And so it's, yes, apparently onomatopoeic, although I can't quite see that. It's the case with many onomatopoeic words where I just think, really? Did someone really think that's what, particularly with bird names, for example, you know, the peewit I can sort of get, but things like the kittiwake and things, you just think, really? Anyway, gobbledygook is one of my favourites because it was coined in imitation of a turkey. So the turkey just kind of going around making unintelligible noises, much like me at the moment. But it was coined by the grandson of Samuel Maverick. And you will remember, Gyles, we've talked about Samuel Maverick. So first of all, the grandson in question was called Maury, Maury. I don't know if that was short for Maurice or if that was his name anyway. And his inspiration, as I say, was the turkey. And he said that the turkey is always gobbledygobbling and strutting with ludicrous pomposity. So it's a really, really good word, and we owe it to him. But just a reminder that Samuel Maverick was quite an important lawyer, actually, but also a ranch man. He had lots of sheep, lots of cattle, and he became famous for not branding his animals. And history doesn't relate whether he found it too cruel or whether he just didn't have time. But either way, his unbranded animals would often wander off into neighbouring farms. And because they were sort of wandering off the beaten path, people would look at these animals and say, okay, there goes another maverick. And so maverick became a byword really for somebody who doesn't conform to the, you know, to the sort of standard, if you like, and who is often a little bit eccentric too.
And you're telling me that this guy, Maverick's grandson,
yes,
the unusual name, conjured up the word gobbledygook?
He did.
Well, it's an extraordinary coincidence, isn't it?
I know, it's great, isn't it? Well,
Grandpa gives his name to the language, and grandson creates a word that's part of the language.
Exactly. Well, I think Samuel Maverick he certainly didn't try to get his name into the dictionary, but that is what happened. Whereas Maury, I think, probably was looking for some kind of linguistic legacy. But anyway, I love that one. He's achieved it.
I think Maury is a very interesting name. Maury?
Yes. I've not heard it before.
Well, there's a name I hadn't heard before, except I had heard it before. As you know, last week I was introduced an interesting name because, as you know, Susie, I am the Chancellor of the University of Chester. You know this because we were thrilled to be able to give you an honorary degree. And
I have the certificate right in front of me here.
Well, it was a very special day and you spoke brilliantly at the graduation. There was another graduation last week, and one of the students graduated, gloried in the name of Thumbelina.
Oh, that's amazing.
Wasn't that an enchantment?
Fantastic, yes.
I was so pleased when she came up. I mean, I could hardly... I tried to let go of her hand as I was shaking it. I said, this is wonderful. I wanted to say, Thumbelina dance, Thumbelina sing. Anyway, wasn't that a lovely name to have,
That is
Thumbelina?
Lovely. That's
and
brilliant.
Interestingly, she was not the size of a thumb. She was tall. She was tall and beautiful and clearly brilliant because she got a degree. So congratulations to Thumbelina.
Thumbelina, that's wonderful.
Wonderful name.
Yes. Definitely no nonsense there at all in Chester. But there's another word. Have you heard of folderol?
Not only have I heard of folderol, but there was an entertainment troupe, I think in the 1920s and 1930s, called the Folderols. They were a kind of Pierrot group. They have performed on the end of piers. And I know about it because I have a feeling that my friend and sometime mentor, a British comedian called Cyril Fletcher, who wrote nonsense poems himself, which he performed, odd odes, he was a member of the Folderols, I believe, in the 1930s. So folderol, is it some kind of dance or folly? What is the origin of the word?
Well, it was more a meaningless refrain in songs. So it's been around for a while. I think its first record is 1701, but that suggests it was around in the 1600s as well. And it's a little bit like La 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 or Fa La La. And in fact, Fa La La seems to be the inspiration for Folderol, weirdly, although obviously it morphed a little bit along the way. But yeah, something that is just, as I say, without substance and a little bit meaningless, but a useful filler nonetheless, as nonsense often is. So yeah, so there are many, many words. I mean, balderdash was once a really unappetizing concoction of different liquids. So it was ale that was watered down with milk. And there's one recipe from centuries ago that advises adding quicklime and pigeon dung to this balderdash. So that's another one.
What's interesting about the word balderdash, though, is I think of balderdash meaning it's rubbish.
Yes.
Somebody says something almost, if I may be a bit vulgar for a moment, almost as though it's a longer version of balls, meaning you're talking. Whereas I think of gobbledygook as something amusing, as nonsense.
Yes.
Whereas balderdash I think of as you're
dismissive.
Talking, pejorative. Am I
I
right
agree.
or wrong?
Same with codswallop. No, absolutely. There is a distinction between the two. And I think we are talking very much about nonsense in the sort of quite fun and light-hearted, frivolous sense, whereas codswallop and balderdash aren't. But if you do want to dismiss something, I think balderdash is brilliant and should make a comeback because it's now very, very old-fashioned. But yeah, gobbledygook, I think, to me is a little bit like, there's another word for it, which is bafflegab. And bafflegab is kind of unintelligible or indecipherable bluster, really. So I think it can be used insultingly, but it's got that sort of slightly bouncy, trippy sound to it, hasn't it?
Yeah.
So should we get on to Spike Milligan? Because
yes.
He was just, I don't know, he was kind of ahead in various polls, wasn't he? There was one in the 1990s, which was basically asking people for their favourite comic poem. And he came out a long way ahead of Lewis Carroll and Edward Lear. And I don't know too much about Spike Milligan, other than that he had struggles, didn't he?
Yes, he had mental health struggles.
Yeah, which he was very open about. And actually maybe was one of the sort of first, well, not one of the first probably, but a really important person who opened up the issue of depression, etc. And his nonsense verse and his nonsense music of the Ning Nang Nong, maybe you can read it to us, actually, Gyles.
Or maybe you should read it to us, because I'm always reading poems. Why don't you read it to us?
Okay.
Just for people around the world who may not know who even this character is.
Yes.
You know, he is
I agree.
His real name, for what it's worth, it was Terence Allen Milligan. He was known as Spike. And he was Irish by birth, so that when he got his knighthood, he couldn't call himself Sir Spike. He had a KBE. And he was born back in 1918. He was born in India. India was very much part of him throughout his life. And he lived to the age of 83. And he died in Rye, a town with many literary connections, because the great Henry James, the American novelist who lived in England, he also lived in Rye. E.F. Benson, who created those wonderful comic novels about Map and Lucia, came from Rye as well. Anyway, he was famous in a variety of ways. I mean, we remember him now, I hope, as a poet and writer. But he also was part of the Goons, which was a comedy group in the 1950s. And he created all these wonderful characters like Eccles. He was huge fun. He wrote some wonderful books. The first one I remember coming across was Pacoon. And then he did, I think, about 7 volumes of autobiography, beginning with Adolf Hitler, My Part in His Downfall. And these were basically surreal, but real. They told the real story, but with surreal inflections. And he was much loved by the now King Charles III, when he was Prince of Wales. And in fact, when he was even younger in the 1950s, he heard the Goons on radio and loved them. But this poem you're going to perform is, it's just a delightful poem. And it is pure nonsense in the tradition of Lewis Carroll and Edward Lear. Take it away, Susie.
On the Ning Nang Nong, where the cows go bong and the monkeys all say boo, there's a Nong Nang Ning, where the trees go ping and the teapots jibber jabber jew. On the Nong Ning Nang, all the mice go clang, and you just can't catch them when they do. So it's Ning Nang Nong, cows go bong, Nong Nang Ning, trees go ping, Nong Ning Nang, the mice go clang. What a noisy place to belong is the Ning Nang Nong.
It's lovely.
Oh, excellent. Love it. Yeah, and apparently it is amongst the 10 most commonly taught poems in primary schools in the UK. And you can absolutely understand why, can't you? Because it's just fun and it introduces you to the joy that there is in poetry and indeed in nonsense verse. Now, when it comes to nonsense verse, I think for most of us, of our generations, Edward Lear is probably one of the supreme masters of the art. And he was just phenomenal. I wouldn't ask you if you ever met Edward Lear, because he died in 1888. But he put together lots of recipes and different alphabets and songs and short stories, etc. But he is known principally, isn't he, for his nonsense collection of poems. And the Owl and the Pussycat, perhaps the best.
The best. I say yes with a little hesitation in my voice, only because now he is recognized as a very significant Victorian artist.
Okay.
And his paintings can sell for many hundreds of thousands of pounds.
Gosh.
Even if they have not touched a million, which they may have done. He was a fine landscape artist. He taught drawing to Queen Victoria.
Oh, how amazing.
Among other things. But of course, the Owl and the Pussycat, I'm intrigued if the Nin Nang Yong poem is better known than the Owl and Pussycat, because I think the Owl and Pussycat probably is the best known.
I agree.
Nonsensical poem written by Edward Lear. It gave the title to my collection of poems to learn by heart, Dancing by the Light of the Moon. It's an absolute enchantment as a poem, I think. Completely wonderful.
He also loved, and maybe we could read the Owl and the Pussycat very well, at least the first stanza. I kind of almost think I remember it, but I'd worried that I'd fall down somewhere. But he also loved limericks, didn't he? He loved the form of the limerick, and that it always focused on a particular individual. And one of my favourites is, there was a young lady of Norway who casually sat in a doorway. When the door squeezed her flat, she exclaimed, "What of that?" This courageous young lady of Norway. I just love those. But will you just read us maybe a tiny bit of The Owl and the Pussycat?
Well, I thought maybe it should be my poem of the week, that we can keep it to the end.
Oh, that's a lovely idea.
Yeah. I have to say about the limerick, it's very interesting, and you can help me there, because some people say, oh yes, he invented the limerick. I don't think he did. I seem to recall that the limerick is actually something to do with limerick in Ireland. I know if you look at the dictionary definition, it simply says the 5-line nonsense poem known as limerick originated in the 18th century as an alehouse chorus. Mm-hmm. Will you come up to limerick? Is that so? I mean, I read that in a dictionary once. What is the origin of the limerick? Do you know?
Well, it's interesting. So the first record in the OED is 1885, but that is just the name. So the verse form was around in England in the early 18th century, and it was indeed popularised by Edward Lear, although interestingly, he didn't ever use the term limerick. Oh. So the first reference we have is from the Sporting Times in 1885, a man who would keep whispering limericks. So I think etymologically speaking, it is apparently from a parlour game in which each player recited some kind of verse, and it was followed by a sung chorus containing the phrase, "Won't you come up to limerick?" So absolutely right. I didn't know about the alehouse connection, but that makes total sense.
Because you say the 18th century, I've got one here that I think is even earlier than that. I would say is probably the 15th, 16th century.
Oh, really? Amazing.
Well, it's got the AABBA rhyming scheme. Let me give it to you. It's a little bit cheeky.
Okay.
It goes like this. You, as in EWE, the animal, you bleateth after lamb. Louth after calf too. Bullock starteth. Buck farteth. Merry sing cuckoo.
It does sound very similar. Yeah, you're absolutely right with the verse form. That's really interesting.
I've got in front of me, and I might share it with you, just a couple of Edward Lear's limericks. There was an old person of Ischia, whose conduct grew friskier and friskier. He danced hornpipes and jigs, and ate thousands of figs, that lively old person of Ischia. And what Edward Lear tended to do was repeat the phrase from the first line in the last line, which people, I think, would say now is a bit tame. There was an old man in a boat who said, "I'm afloat, I'm afloat." When they said, "No, you ain't," he was ready to faint, that unhappy old man in a boat.
I really, really want to talk about Blackadder because it's surely one of the best episodes when it comes to any kind of reference to lexicography in the history of, British programming is Blackadder. And I'm very aware that people, may not be aware of it. I think a lot of people in the UK will be, but essentially, about Blackadder. And
of course I know
did you
about
watch
Blackadder.
it? Yeah. So it was.
I love Blackadder.
Good, me too. Well, Blackadder essentially is a series of, I can't remember how many series there are actually, maybe 4, which ran in the 1980s. So from 1983 to 1989. And each series is set in a different period of British history. And Edmund Blackadder is always a member of the same British family dynasty, but obviously is playing different characters. And the reason that I have to mention this is, of course, the very famous scene, certainly in Britain, which involves Robbie Coltrane, who played Samuel Johnson and who comes to show off really his completed dictionary. And he thinks it's completed. Well, he says, here it is, the very cornerstone of English scholarship. This book, sir, contains every word in our beloved language, at which point Blackadder picks him up. And do you remember what came next?
I do. Go on.
Yes.
He says,
every single one, sir. And Dr. Johnson, his confidence is still quite strong at this place. And he says, yes, every single word. And then, of course, Blackadder is off. He says, in that case, sir, I hope you will not object if I also offer the doctor my most enthusiastic contrafibularities. And Dr. Johnson looks round at him and says, what? And Blackadder says, contrafibularity, sir? It is a common word down our way, at which point Samuel Johnson takes the pencil from behind his ear and frantically starts writing it in as Blackadder continues, oh, I'm sorry, sir, I'm anaspeptic, phrasmotic, even compunctuous to have caused you such pericombobulation. And it's just the most wonderful piss take, if you will allow me that phrase. It's just extremely clever.
Because these words are all what I earlier on called unwords, aren't they? They're not real words at all. These are words that have been conceived by the writers.
Yes, and actually, interestingly, the script had slightly different versions of it. So Rowan Atkinson, who plays Blackadder, riffed on them and came up with his own version. So he didn't stick entirely to the script. But the reason I love it, and all lexicographers will love it, is that it points at an absolute central tenet of dictionary making, which is that you can never hope to capture every aspect of language. You can never hope to capture every single word that's out there in the ether. And so he just does it in the most sort of perfect way, puncturing Samuel Johnson's balloon, because Samuel Johnson probably was a little bit bonkers at times. And as I am talking to you, Gyles, I'm being clawed by my cat. So if my voice goes slightly higher, you'll know what's going on. I think she's coming up to say hello to you in a minute.
Oh, I love it.
Obviously, she likes these as well. Just come up here.
Very good. Well, we love your cat.
You love my
give
cat.
Credit where it's due, and that is to the writers. I think I'm right in saying that the first series of Blackadder was written by Richard Curtis and Rowan Atkinson, who conceived it and created it.
Yes.
And then the next 3 series 2 to 4, and I know there were one-offs as well, they were all written by Ben Elton. But the team just came up. I mean, this is just, it was consistently funny.
Yeah, absolutely.
Could you, those words that you've given us there, one of them, I think, is a real word. Isn't compunctuous an actual real word? 3 of them are unwords. One of them is a real word, but maybe not.
So, yes, I actually think that one is, 1616, characterised by compunction, in other words, remorse. So yes, nice that he slipped a real one in there, actually. I've never really looked at the history of that one, so that's nice. But it's just, as I say, it's just a wonderful takedown, really, of someone who thinks that they have got it all. We should probably, before we get to the correspondence, because time is running out, we should probably also mention Dr. Zeus. Were you a fan of Dr. Zeus?
Please, I feel we should do a whole episode about him because,
yeah.
I mean, in terms of in the United States of America, one of the great children's writers, creators of nonsense, and creators of a whole world. And though I am afraid I did never meet him, my mother did.
Oh.
My mother lived for many years in La Jolla in California.
Yeah.
And he visited for a signing session her local bookshop. And she queued up and bought some of his books and got them autographed for her grandchildren. So my children. So we have books signed by Dr. Zeus. And I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it.
I think it's Zeus, I think. Yeah.
But he came up with lots of words. I mean, zzzzzz was one of his turns of phrase, wasn't it?
Yes. And, well, I love it really because of nerd. Because he was the first, as far as we know, to mention a nerd. It was a fictional animal in his children's story, If I Ran the Zoo.
Oh, I thought it was a character he'd created called
It is.
Mr.
It
Nerd.
is.
Or,
Absolutely.
it's an animal, is it?
It's a kind of humanoid creature, one with who's really unkempt and small, but with a large head and is always kind of disapproving.
So he's got nerdish qualities, and that's why people like that. We call them nerds because of Dr. Zeus.
We think. I mean, it's not definitive, but that's our best guess.
Wow.
Yeah. I know, but I think you're right. I think there is more to be said for sure about Dr. Zeus.
Can I say something? We must, because I've just seen that Dr. Zeus was born on the 2nd of March, 1904. This means it is the 120th anniversary of his birth, and I think we need to celebrate him. And and this is why he was in La Jolla, California. That's where he lived and died. So that's why my mother met him.
Okay.
There we are. Well, honestly, I think we do need to celebrate him. The Cat in the Hat, is there a better book ever written? I wonder.
I wonder too.
Let's come back to Dr. Zeus, because I'm just looking at him here, and there's so much to say about him, including what his real name was. Do you know what his real name was?
I have no idea.
Theodor Gyles.
Oh, yes. That does
Zeus was a family name, a middle name, under which he wrote all his books, which I see here, the 60 books, are reckoned to have sold over 600 million copies.
Good grief.
Yeah,
Good grief.
Exactly. He's done even better than you and me. Maddening, isn't it? What can you do?
What can we do? Well, over to Helen Barrett, who has a question for us, which is not directly about nonsense, but it is to do with the real complexities and intricacies of the English language.
This message has come to us from Helen all the way in Kalamunda in Perth in Western Australia. My husband was expressing a very mild annoyance that a modern car manufacturer has named a new model their shooting brakes, when it is in fact merely a wagon. He then explained to me that what a shooting brake was, and we wondered where the name would have come from. Could shooting brake be related to a fire brake or a wind brake? Is there any relationship between brake and brake? That's B-R-E-A-K and B-R-A-K-E, which is how you spell brake when it comes to a shooting brake. You might put on the brakes in a car and also hope something soft will break your fall from a height. If not, please could let us know where and when on earth the word brake, B-R-A-K-E, comes from. She adds, I love your podcast, and my family and friends seem to enjoy it when I pass on one of your gems, be it an etymology or you'll never guess who else Gyles has met. So thank you for the ever-entertaining and illuminating show. Best wishes, Helen Barrett. Good. Okay.
I love
What's the answer? Give us a break.
Okay.
Susie.
So the shooting brake. Well, there were many different types of vehicles around at the beginning of the 20th century. So you had wagonettes, you had shooting brakes, you had luggage cars, and many more besides. And brake here was, and that's B-R-A-K-E, was and had been from the 19th century, a heavy carriage frame that had 2 or 4 wheels and that was actually used, it had no body to it, it was used for training or breaking in horses. And then a little bit later, it came to be a horse-drawn wagonette that was designed to accommodate passengers and goods. But if you remember that breaking in horses, you will get an answer to the question, are the 2 spellings of brake, B-R-E-A-K and B-R-A-K-E, related? Because the answer is yes, if you go back far enough. So I'll start with the brake as in breaking one's legs. That actually has, if you again take it all the way back, it has relatives in a Latin word frangere, a verb, which means to break. And that shows up in fragile, fragment, refract, and lots of different things. And of course, to break is to divide into fragments or pieces. And the old past tense of that break, as in break one's leg, break one's stride, was break, B-R-A-K-E. So coming on to that brake, as in the brakes of a car or a shooting brake, the very first meaning of that in English in the 16th century was actually an instrument for crushing or pounding something. And that did come from the same Old English root that gave us the other brake, And the word was applied to lots and lots of different crushing implements. So, for example, a brake, B-R-A-K-E, was a tool that would break up the woody part of flax in cloth making. And if you take that idea of a machine breaking something up, the other break, and add to that an old French word, so you add to the mix bras in French, meaning arm, and you get the idea of a lever or handle that controls a machine and can also stop it because it breaks, B-R-E-A-K-S, the motion of something. It literally breaks the stride. And it was that gave us the modern meaning, a mechanical device that stops motion. So it's complicated, but if you do take it back far enough, the brake and the brake are related. And the brake that is the vehicle, the shooting brake, as I say, probably began with the idea of breaking in horses. And I don't really like that phrase because it suggests that you have to break a horse's spirit in some way. But anyway, that's how it was. So the two are actually relatives of the same very big family.
And the vehicle that's known as a shooting brake,
yeah.
How did shooting and brake come together? What was the first shooting brake?
Because I think it was used for all the equipment used for shooting or hunting. I think that was the idea there. Yeah.
So it was a car in which you carried all your hunting.
All your stuff.
Kit.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Oh, that's very good. Gosh, you know an awful lot.
It's complicated, isn't it? Well, no, I had to do some digging for that one. That wasn't off the top of my head, as you could probably tell.
Well, you dug well.
Thank
good.
you.
Ellen, I hope that gives you the answers you were looking for. Oh, we've got a voice note for our next one. This is from somebody, Frances van Velsen. But actually her maiden name is Saunders. My husband of 35 years is of Dutch heritage. So this is why the accent turns out really not to be a Dutch one.
Dear Gyles and Susie, thank you for your deeply comforting and truly interesting podcast. I find Susie's dulcet tones and Gyles' genteel tones very soothing to listen to, as I'm having to convalesce in bed currently. Thank you for helping me through this tough time. I would like to ask about a word my mum, a Dubliner, used sometimes as I was growing up. If an item was in need of repair or replacement, she would declare, "Oh, that's in flitters," before whisking it away for repair or mending. This was a time in the 1960s when darning socks and repairing clothes, passing on hand-me-downs to siblings, etc. was still commonplace. Where does this word come from? Is it quite old? My mum's family came from inner-city Dublin originally, and I wonder if it's a particularly Dublin expression or has wider use. Thank you again for all you do. You have helped this listener pass the time pleasantly. Kindest regards from the west coast of Ireland, Frances van Velsen. And Saunders is my maiden name. My husband of 35 years is of Dutch heritage.
Don't we love Frances's Irish accent? Isn't it charming? Talk about a soothing tone. What do you think?
We do, and we send Frances also all our love too.
We do.
A speedy convalescence.
Convalescence. I love Dublin. Do you go to Dublin much?
No, I haven't been. No, in fact, I haven't been for 6 or 7 years, actually.
Then you haven't been since the opening of the Museum of Literature Ireland.
No.
Which is now in Dublin. It's a new museum in a very old building. And they celebrate Irish literature in the most wonderful way. I think it's called MOLI, so it could sound a bit like Molly, as in Molly Bloom, because they do a lot of celebrating of James Joyce, who created Molly Bloom in the museum. But all the great Irish writers are celebrated there. I do recommend it. It only opened, I think, not that long before lockdown and the COVID horror. So anyone going to Dublin, I recommend the Museum of Literature Ireland, right in the centre of that great city. Now,
lovely. Right,
what is the answer to her flitters problem?
It was lovely to look into this, actually, because the original version of the phrase was in fitters rather than flitters. And fitters, from the 16th century onwards, were fragments So little pieces, little atoms. And you would find them in various phrases, such as to break something into fitters, to tear to fitters, and that kind of thing. And it's actually probably related to the fit that we have if we have a conflict of some kind, a sort of fit of the blues, or a seizure, if you actually have a fit. And of course, if something convulses, it's likely to break into pieces. And flitters and fitters, it did become flitters. They don't seem to be confined to Ireland, because I also found in fitters and flitters in a glossary of Lincolnshire dialect. But one of the reasons I really loved Francis's questions is it actually reminded me of a wonderful word also from Lincolnshire dialect, which is flisms. And do you know what flisms are, Gyles?
No idea.
They are the tiny particles of various things. So little floating particles. And I always apply them to the little bits of biscuit if you have dunked too many of them in your tea, or if you've waited too long and it kind of breaks up. I like to think that those little bits at the top, which, let's face it, I think make your tea undrinkable, but others may disagree. Those are called flisms.
Well, there we go. Look, if people want to get in touch, it's very simple. Our address is just purplepeople@somethingrhymes.com. It's purple people, all one word, at somethingrhymes, all one word.com. And if you've got weird words, wacky idioms, unwords, new words, old words that you would like to know the origin of, just send us a voice note to us at that address, purplepeople@somethingrhymes.com, and you could be featured in a not too far away episode of Something Rhymes with Purple.
Perfect. Well, it's almost time for us to say goodbye, but I have very quickly got my usual trio of words that I have either rescued from the historical dictionary, or which should probably stay there, to be honest, but which interested me nonetheless. So the first one is actually, it sounds to me like something Blackadder would say, or would have said to Samuel Johnson, spicitude. And spicitude means thickness or compactness. So you might say, well, make sure you have the right spicitude of clothes for your suitcase. But it just sounds funny. Spicitude, not something you will hear these days. The second is slightly poetic. I just love it. Latescent. And latescent describes the act of something that slowly becomes hidden. So the sun might become latescent at sunset. And there's a lovely poem from 1914 that talks of the last step stilled of swift latescent night. Sunrise a thought, death permeates the light. I think it's really beautiful. So that's poetic. And now for a real bit of bathos, because this word is actually really quite horrible. What do you call the fluff between your toes?
Ooh.
Well, some people really horribly refer to it as toe jam, which always makes me just wince.
There is no fluff between my toes, I'm pleased to say.
Good.
Fluff between your toes.
Well, if you just got if a new pair of socks, for example, you might end up with some. Anyway, it's gronk.
Ooh.
Yeah, none of that is particularly nice, but it kind of made me laugh.
But how interesting that there's a word for it.
Yeah, there's a word for
Just
everything.
as there's a word, isn't there, when you peel a banana for those little bits of...
Oh, yes, the phlegm.
Yeah.
And actually, what am I saying? There isn't a word for everything, because there were lots of linguistic gaps, but we're all doing our best to fill them.
Well, so that's what the fluff between your toes is your gronk.
Is your gronk. Anyway, moving swiftly on to one of the best poems of anybody's childhood.
Yeah, it is.
Take it away.
And if you want a performance of it that is more memorable than the one I'm going to give you now, go onto YouTube or social media and put in my name and that of Dame Judy Dench, because as part of a show that we do, and we've done it around the country a few times, we're doing it some more this year, we performed The Owl and the Pussycat together. And I have to say,
amazing.
her reading of it is fantabulous. But this is just me doing it solo.
Give us the first verse. Brilliant.
The owl and the pussycat went to sea in a beautiful pea-green boat. They took some honey and plenty of money wrapped up in a 5-pound note. The owl looked up to the stars above and sang to a small guitar. Oh, lovely pussy, oh, pussy, my love, what a beautiful pussy you are, you are, you are, what a beautiful pussy you are. Pussy said to the owl, you elegant fowl, how charmingly sweet you sing. Oh, let us be married, too long we have tarried, but what shall we do for a ring? They sailed away for a year and a day to the land where the bong tree grows, and there, in a wood, A piggywig stood with a ring at the end of his nose, with a ring at the end of his nose. Dear pig, are you willing to sell for 1 shilling your ring? Said the piggy, I will. So they took it away and were married next day by the turkey who lives on the hill. They dined on mince and slices of quince, which they ate with a runcible spoon, and hand in hand, on the edge of the sand, they danced by the light of the moon, the moon, the moon. They danced by the light of the moon.
Beautiful. You read all of it. It's lovely.
I did read all of it. Forgive me. It's just a poem I can't resist.
No. It's
He
lovely.
invented the word runcible, didn't he?
He did, and no one knows what a runcible spoon is.
How interesting. And did
You
he
can
invent
make
the
it what you
bong
want.
tree as well?
Quite possibly. Quite possibly. Well, that's our lot today. Thank you so much for keeping us company, as always. And for more Purple, please do consider the Purple Plus Club, soon to be renamed, I hear, for ad-free listening and some exclusive bonus episodes on words and language.
That's it. That's it from Something Rhymes with Purple, which is a Sony Music Entertainment production produced by Naya Deo. God, she's brilliant. With additional production from Charlie Morell, Jennifer Mystery, Matthias Torresole, and Ollie Wilson. Matthias has been pressing the levers today, hasn't he?
He certainly has. He's not pressing the brakes. But I have to say that when Naya moonlights on other shows, Gyles, she is called by the other presenter, she's called a goddess. So I think we need to up the ante.
A goddess?
Yes. Well,
My
she is
God.
a goddess, but I think
She
we
is a
need to
god-
find even more superlatives.
Well, what can we... Is a queen higher than a goddess? Because she's the queen of the controls.
I don't
as far as
think
we're
so.
concerned.
Leave
So
it with
what
me.
is the supreme... She is the supreme being. She is the supreme being. She is the top of Mount Olympus. She's Zeus. Never mind Dr. Zeus. She is our Zeus. Was he the champion god? Was he the
Oh, I
king?
see. I thought you were talking about Dr. Zeus.
No.
Yeah, he was. He probably was. I have no idea. But either way, honestly, Naya is absolutely brilliant. And
Brilliant.
thank you to the whole team, and thank you to everybody who's listening.
Yeah. Susie's feeling very guilty about forgetting your birthday now. This is the way it goes.